Hello. Welcome to Animal Farm. Now, Animal Farm, if we have enough time, we'll talk about Animal Farm. If we don't, we're going to have to skip it, which would be a shame because it is delightful. Delightful might be too strong. It's happier than Lord of the Flies, kind of. Okay. So, Animal Farm is written by this guy named George Orwell. George Orwell is actually a pen name for a guy named Eric Blair, who was born in Bengal, India. His father worked for the British government, so he was part of the colonization of India. And he actually did not write a lot about India, which is interesting. A lot of British authors who have strong ties in India, like Rudyard Kipling, tended to write about India, but Eric Blair didn't. So George Orwell was born in 1903, died in 1950. So not a particularly long life. He eventually went to England when he was 8 to attend boarding school. He was always a writer. He did actually work in Burma in the civil services, but he wasn't good at it. He was very conscious of corruption, and he was very bad at not calling attention to it. So if he saw someone doing what they weren't supposed to do, he was going to call them on it. But when you're working in a semi-corrupt system that is oppressing the people that actually are supposed to live there, like, that's going to get you in trouble. So he also did a lot of writing. He was a socialist and a political activist. He was on the anti-communist side in the Spanish Civil War. He was unable to serve in World War II because of his health. But he was he was always trying to find out ways to help people. So he thought that there was a lot of corruption in prisons in England, right? So this is this man's solution. He decides to get arrested, but he's real bad at it. So he keeps jaywalking, and after a while the police are like, "Oh, it's that guy. Yeah, no, we're not gonna." Okay? Because also, if you're in a corrupt system, which at the time in England it was a corrupt system. He just needed the inside scoop, the expose, right? But no one was going to let him because everyone's like, "Oh, it's that writer. It's that writer guy who's trying to, get that expose. We're not going to let him into our prison system. No way." So that's him. Animal Farm is particularly interesting because it is a fable. And it is the story of the Russian Revolution, but told with farm animals. Like you do. Basically, it wasn't a book that a lot of authors wanted, a lot of publishers wanted, because it's kind of weird, especially if you don't know what it is. It's about these animals that take over their farm and start to run their farm on their own and do their own thing and govern themselves and all their rules and all the things that go right and all the things that go wrong. And at first, it does not seem like a good book. However, it is a good book. First of all. Second of all, if you know what the story underneath the story is, it's even better. The reason that we've got this kind of being a sneaky story, and the reason that he's not being so obvious in his takedown against Stalin, is the fact that Stalin is still alive, and Stalin had a military police and secret agents that would go out and kill people that he didn't like, and George Orwell, I don't think, wanted to be murdered. So that's why he had a pseudonym. So he believed in socialism. He liked the idea that everyone gets equal amounts of stuff for equal amounts of work, which is not socialism, but the idea that everyone in the community is cared for and you don't have to worry about those things because you're there and you're good, right? And that's a thing that's been worked on in human history for a while. We've never quite perfected it because there's always going to be someone who gets more stuff. That's just how it works. We're people. It's never going to work for people, right? It's a good idea on paper. But in principle, communism, socialism, they're never going to actually work. And I wish that you were here in person so we could have this conversation. Basically, the idea is that everyone does a job that is fit for their talents, and everyone is paid equally, regardless of what they did, based on those talents. Which is great, unless you're the guy who fixes the roads, who's getting the same as the official nap time taker. Not that there was a job as a nap person, but you know what I mean. Like, someone is really good at drawing, so they get paid the exact same amount of money for drawing all day, as you get for repairing roads all day. And that's not really fair. So that's kind of where that comes in. Now, Animal Farm is in fact what we call satire, which is making fun of something to prove a point. Satire is very pointed. There's a definite message. There's a reason the story's being told. And this is satire of the Russian Revolution and the communist rise to power. And totalitarianism, which is a form of government directed by one political group that includes everything. He also is basically exploring the idea of a utopia. Can we actually have a utopia? Or will it turn into a dystopia? That is the question. So as we read Animal Farm, I want you to keep in mind a couple of things. This story is that every story has a perspective or a point of view that it's told from. So if you have a third-person point of view, it's told by someone who's not part of the story, someone who's just looking down. You either have limited or omniscient. So limited means you can kind of poke into some people's brains, or you can just kind of see like a picture. If you have an omniscient narrator, third person, they can see into anybody's brain that they want at any time. Irony, as we talked about, is basically you have verbal irony, where words that appear to say one thing actually mean something else, and dramatic irony, in which what the characters think isn't what we actually know is true. Then situational irony, which is where what you expect to happen isn't actually what happens. Then you have characters. So we have dynamic characters who change over the story, and then also static characters who do not change, round characters that are fully developed, and flat characters who have one or two traits and very little actual personality and personal history. So as we're reading, I want you to figure out which characters are flat, which are round, who's dynamic, and who's static. Also, there's a strong sense of the author's message. What is the point that George Orwell wants you to get across? What's he trying to tell us about government? So Animal Farm is fascinating. So basically, every character is representing a character or a person in Russian history. So we have Moses the Raven, who represents the Catholic or the Russian Orthodox Church, okay, which was seen as basically working with the government to suppress the poor folks. Then you have the Tsar, or the farmer, who is not taking good care of the farm. He's not doing a good job. The animals are totally within their right to kick him out of the farm because he's bad at it. Okay? And then you have our pig friend, Old Major, who represents Karl Marx and also Lenin. Not like the Beatle Lenin, but Lenin, the Russian guy. Actually, excuse me, in Moscow, if you go to Moscow today, or at least in the 90s, there was the taxidermied corpse of Lenin lying in state. Fun facts. And then you have the pigs. We've got Trotsky, who is one of the leaders of the Russian Revolution, and he is represented by Snowball. You have Napoleon, the pig, who represents Stalin. You can kind of see where this story is going. You have Molly the horse, who represents the Russian upper class, the nobility. They're prissy sorts of people. They want to have wealth. They liked being rich. Thank you very much. They were not pleased with giving up all of those things. Then you have Boxer and Molly, the cart horses, who represent the working class. Squealer, who represents the propaganda machine and the newspaper that was put out by Stalin to make sure everyone thought that he was just the greatest. Yeah. Then you have Mr. Whymper, who were the capitalist societies and countries that were like, yeah, Russia's not really doing nice things, but we're going to work with them anyway. Whimper, they're slimy, you know. Then you've got the sheep, who represent the sheeple, who are like, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and just kind of going along, doing whatever. Then you've got Benjamin, who is the goat, and he's the donkey, excuse me, Benjamin's the donkey. And he represents the educated class that could see what was happening. They could see how the society was slipping away from that equal plane to becoming more of a dictatorship, and didn't say anything. And so those are our major characters. I feel like I'm missing someone. Oh, yes. The Woodpile, which we're not at yet, represents the Non-Aggression Pact. If you remember from Lord of the Flies, Stalin and Hitler had that handshake where they agreed not to attack. The Woodpile represents the signing of that Non-Aggression Pact. Also, Mr. Frederick at Pinchfield represents England, and Frederick at Pinchfield represents Hitler and Germany, and then, because Foxwood represents England. Sorry. Yes. So, Foxwood represents England, and Pinchfield represents Germany. And those are the two farms that are the closest tied with Animal Farm throughout the book. And also, Germany Farm will eventually try to invade Animal Farm. And that's a big thing. So that's just some background information on Animal Farm. As we're going, I do have two different movies. There's a live-action puppet movie made in the 90s with a combination of CGI and puppets. It is just as horrible as you could imagine, and I love it so much. So we're going to watch clips of that as we're going, and when we're done, we are going to watch the cartoon. It's a short little 45, 56 minute long video, and I want you guys, as we're watching, to pay special attention to the endings. As you're going, you'll know how things are going because of history. Like, we know what happens at the end of the Russian Revolution. We know that Stalin wins. We know that Stalin kills a whole bunch of his people, that he has death camps in Siberia where he sends political adversaries. And we know that it does not go well, right? But as you're reading, I want you to see if you ever get a moment where you think it might end better for our little animal buddies. So we're going to start. There's some worksheets that go with this. The first worksheet is about fables specifically and kind of what fables are and how that kind of all works together. So we're going to talk about fables, like Mr. Aesop. It's been on satire, character names. This is a really fun unit, and I enjoy it a lot, so I hope you enjoy it too, and enjoy Animal Farm and some delightful, delightful history.